Why don't slower F1 teams copy the fastest car? We all know the feeling from back in school when we borrow a friend's piece of homework, with the agreement being that you can copy it, but change it up a little so it isn't too obvious. This meme thrust itself into the world of Formula 1 when Racing Point announced their 2020 challenger, the RP20, this year. With the regulations not being too dissimilar to last year, it begs the question, why don't all teams copy the best car? Whether you want to call it the pink Mercedes or Tracing Point, which by the way I find absolutely hilarious, the fact is the team have come out of the blocks with a car not only good enough to easily be top of the midfield, but one which is even giving Red Bull a headache. The RP20 drew plenty of attention during testing, not just because of its pace, but because it bears a very striking resemblance to last year's championship-winning Mercedes W10. Cue gasps. Given that the team uses Mercedes power units, some rivals have wondered whether there's something fishy going on, with the Racing Point and Mercedes sharing more between them than is allowed by the regulations. Customer cars are not permitted in Formula 1, and there is a strict list of parts which govern what teams are allowed to share between them. Anything on the listed parts list must be designed by teams themselves, and include things like the bodywork, roll structures, front impact structures, and the survival cell. Other non-listed components, which include things like power units, gearboxes and brakes, can be bought in from other teams or outside suppliers. Break this rule and the penalties can be devastating. It's at the core of the Spygate scandal that rocked F1 in 2007, where McLaren effectively stole and used in-depth technical information from Ferrari. The result? A $100 million fine and disqualification from the Constructors' Championship. Yeah, that's gotta hurt. Now, panic may have slightly set in at Racing Point, as after the Styrian Grand Prix, Renault lodged a formal protest against the pink Mercedes. They believe that Racing Point has broken the rules under the listed parts and outsourcing of design section under the sporting regulations. We've mentioned listed parts earlier on, but when it comes to outsourcing of design, teams are still not allowed to get help from other competitors in the sport. Haas, as an example, used Dallara. Renault believes that the brake ducts specifically are the intellectual property of Mercedes. All will be revealed soon, I am sure. On the other hand, Andreas Seidel and McLaren believe that there are no grounds for protest of the Racing Point. Racing Point readily admits being inspired by Mercedes design. Team principal Ottmar Safnauer told Reuters during testing, "We're well within all the regulations. Who better to copy than Mercedes? We took pictures of their car, but the design and development were totally our own." Now at this point, it's probably worth talking about design concepts. Each team has a different idea of how to build the fastest car within the regulations, with one obvious example being the difference between Mercedes and Red Bull. Mercedes generally build a long, low, flat car, while the Red Bull is generally a bit shorter with a much steeper rake angle. Both methods work, but in very different ways. This extends across all cars in much less obvious ways, from the shape of the side pods to the tiny winglets on the barge boards. If you put the front wing from a Mercedes on a Williams, the Williams wouldn't suddenly get faster. If anything, it would be slower, because the rest of the car was designed to work with the front wing that Williams designed. Over the past few years, Racing Point, or Force India as they were known, has generally tried to follow Red Bull's high rake philosophy. The problem is that, as we've mentioned, Racing Point buys a lot of its rear-end components from Mercedes, and they're not designed for high rake. As a result, past cars were compromised with this mixing of design philosophies. So, switching to a more Mercedes-like concept makes sense for the team, but to go in so hard on designing a car which so closely resembles the W10 and having it work is quite remarkable. Copying other cars can be a massive risk. In the late 1970s, when ground effect was the aero innovation to have, the Lotus 79 and then the Williams FW07 nailed the concept most. Perfect. Many smaller teams tried to straight up copy these cars, and they were almost all terrible. More recently, Haas has drawn attention for maximising what it can buy from Ferrari to build its cars. And aside from a successful 2018, the team has had plenty of struggles with understanding how to make its Ferrari-like package work. And that's the key word, understanding. Anyone can look at pictures and build a copy, but knowing how to make it work is the real skill. It's early days at the moment, but Racing Point looks to have nailed it. Deviating from one aero concept to something completely different is a massive commitment, especially as when the RP20 was designed, the new regulations were scheduled to come into place in 2021, meaning it was only going to be effective for 1 year. In fact, that's probably what made it a risk worth taking. If it works, then they'll have a great season. If it doesn't, they can just suck up a bad season and not worry too much, especially with all that sweet cash from Lawrence Stroll, eh? Because everything was going to be completely different the next year anyway. As it turns out, the rules being delayed until 2022 is a bonus for Racing Point. They now have a decent car for 2 seasons, as many development areas are being frozen for next year in order to keep costs down. So it's legal, and although it's difficult, it's proven to be effective. But how does it sit with you, the fans? Would you be happy to see F1 teams copy each other in the future? So much so they look almost identical? Let us know in the comment section below.